you can get guns and drugs quicker than you get a library card. And when your parents are not in a position to provide for you, then it's just like a recipe for destruction right there. When you got guns, so and we're not the manufacturers of these guns, we're not the distributors of guns, but these guns magically find themselves in our communities.
Welcome to the Race to Social Justice, a podcast that explores the myriad racial and social challenges facing the modern world, with your hosts, Kiva White and John Kepner. Thank you for being part of the courageous conversation, because when it comes to combating social injustices in America, it is not about being confrontational. It is about being conversational.
Well, hello, John.
Hello, Kiva.
Welcome, everyone, to our Race to Social Justice podcast series. I am Kiva White, the black guy.
And I'm John Kepner, the white guy. Kiva and I share a love of the letter K. K for Kiva, K for Kepner, and more importantly, K for knowledge, what we try to impart in our podcast. It's what Kiva calls the K factor.
Yes, thank you, John. Absolutely. And the goal of our podcast is to promote racial and social equity and justice. And we do this through honest and even sometimes difficult dialogue. We call these courageous conversations. John and I have found our discussions with each other have deepened our respective understandings of racism and our personal responsibilities in that regard. And that had led us to invite guests to share their honest experiences and learnings. We hope these conversations will help our listeners and even our guests in their own journeys. And John, who are our guests today?
Well, I'd like to introduce our two guests today, Colie Levar Long and Wynette Yao. And before I introduce Wynette, who I'm going to ask to introduce Colie, I want to sort of set the stage. The subject tonight is a serious one about our criminal justice system. The conversation was generated by a film that my son Pogue saw in New York at a film festival that Kiva and I also attended, but did not see the film. And after he saw it, it's called The District of Second Chance. And we're gonna play the trailer to that as a leadoff after the introductions. But anyway, he was so inspired by the film, and he's of course aware of what we do with our podcasts, that he called me and said, "Dad, I think you really need to see this film, and I'd like to introduce you to Wynette, and because I think she and Colie would be great guests." So this ties to a series of podcasts that we've done on the subject of our justice system. So this falls within that category. Wynette is a very accomplished, award-winning documentary film maker. She has several accolades. She's produced a wide-ranging number of films, and I'll just mention a few of them that she's gotten awards for. She was a National Emmy nominee for her film All Quiet on the Western Front. She has two Telly Awards, one for a National Geographic documentary entitled The Mystery of the Mummy Murders, and another one, an educational short called E-Snaps, which is on the plastic bag use. And then a Gold Remy Award for World Houston Film Festival, where she showed Who Betrayed Anne Frank. And then finally, a Clarion Award for Understanding Fat on the subject of weight. So it is indeed a wide variety, very accomplished. And I think you have a Pennsylvania connection. I think you graduated from Swarthmore in our neck of the woods here.
Yes, that's right.
So welcome, Wynette. And I would be most grateful if you would introduce your colleague.
Well, Colie Levar Long is kind of indescribable, but he is highly intelligent, charismatic, creative, big-hearted. And he has gotten free for about a year and a half. He unfortunately spent 26 years locked up for a crime he got mixed up with when he was 18, I believe. Is that right? And then it was 19 by the time you went inside. So he was a teenager, went in. Obviously, prison is a very traumatic environment. He actually survived 3 years in solitary, cumulatively. And, so the film really draws on his growth and experience, which he generously shared, and which has really come from the kind of hardship that none of us have endured and don't know how we would do with. And I always feel I would not make it out as well as he has. So that's Colie Levar Long.
Well, welcome to both of you. And we thought it'd be good at this point to play the trailer to sort of set the stage for our discussion.
I was sentenced with life without parole. When they told me I was going to die in prison.
We give out life sentences like it's candy. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of people with life sentences.
A 16-year-old kid put in an environment like that, in this off-the-wall violence, I mean stabbings and murders and rape. Yeah, I always felt like I would never make it out. So I had to make a transition within myself.
Brains develop over time, and my goodness, people change.
And our laws help show that possibility of change is real.
Judges are looking at these cases very closely to decide whether or not someone can safely be released.
And my goal is to file it probably tomorrow.
I'm very, very nervous. I want to convey to the judge my remorse, my rehabilitation, my change.
It's not an automatic get out of jail free card.
I've been watching my mother cry for almost 26 years. I don't know how I'm gonna tell my mother I got them.
If we, as a society, want to believe in second chances like we say we do, I think we need to create that possibility.
When I seen my son walk out the door, my heart dropped to my feet. I knew that it was a God. And God do second chances.
We always like to start with our guests telling us a little bit about their origin stories. And Wynette, let's start with you. Can you tell us about your upbringing, your parents, and those who influenced your life in the professional calling that you are involved in today? Just give us a little bit about who you are.
I did not have filmmaking in my background, so I discovered it by chance. I was raised in Phoenix, Arizona, pretty boring suburb, lots of white people. We were conspicuously the only Chinese around. I did get racial prejudice, it kind of marked my early school education. Basically, I couldn't wait to get out of there. So I went to school at Swarthmore, went to the East Coast. And Phoenix has changed a lot now, but at the time, that's how it felt. It was Barry Goldwater country. I played the classical piano. That was my big thing. I did solo with some orchestras. And I was also really into art history. I went off to learn Chinese in Taiwan after I graduated because everyone always expected me to be able to speak Chinese looking as I do, and I did not. And while I was there, I bumped into a filmmaking person, an editor, and she said, I wonder if I can see the Oscars. I have a film that's been nominated. And I thought, film, oh my God. Film combines music and images. And of course, I wanted to change the world at the time. So I thought that'll reach people much more than academic papers. So I shot my first documentary in Taiwan. It's still in distribution. It's like truly horrible. I'm embarrassed when I get texts. But it was my beginning. And from there on, I just scraped around in film until I, had a lot of experience, and I've had many great adventures. I'm very grateful. I love the career. I don't know if I've always helped to change the world, but certainly in this film, I feel that it can change hearts and minds, and so it was so worth doing.
There's two. I mean, to think about two things that I know about, like they say about history, document and archive, and I think filmmaking helps us really preserve a lot of the events and stuff that are happening in our society. So I really appreciate you engaging in this craft, because without documenting and archiving, there would be no history.
Yeah, that's true. And I've done quite a bit of history, but I'm always looking for the emotion. So I'm very happy you guys cried, because, if you cry and you're moved, then it really did change you in some little way, right? And that's the goal.
No question. Well, Colie, same question for you. Can you tell us about your upbringing, where you grew up, your what your childhood was like, who was influential in your life as you were growing up, and what, let's get right to it. What led to your incarceration?
Yeah, well, my childhood was kind of tumultuous. It was like I'm a product of two worlds. I didn't grow up in abject poverty, but I grew up in DC when DC was the murder capital. Um, Ironically, like my father, he was excellent provider, but very abusive guy. He grew up in the South, and to be real, like it was so bad in my household that at the age of 12, I figured that I was gonna have to kill my father. He was gonna have to kill me. Of how the level of brutality, and that he used to inflict against me. So that prompted me to start running away from home. And so my mother's side of the family, my maternal uncles, they were from Washington. They grew up in DC, and they were in the streets. So they became my surrogate father figures, particularly my uncle Mark. And by me being the first grandchild, I was more like my maternal grandmother. She was like my mother. And that was my baby, but she's a tough lady. Grew up in the streets of DC. Not good. No, she didn't grow up she's from the country too, but she been here, acclimated to this city. So, I just got acclimated in the streets too that way. So, yeah, like I say, growing up in DC in the mid 80s, when that crack epidemic hit, and you see the shift of the communities start to dissolve, where guns start coming to the power, coming to our communities, and you start to see, like, you actually see the neighborhood unravel, where, like, you see a group of elders that once used to be your babysitters and your aunties and family members. Now they're on drugs, and they're buying drugs from the kids they used to take care of, and you just see the total breakdown of the household, and a certain lawlessness came into play. Kid guys that we used to play football with and rec center with, now we're competing for drug territories, and now and I give it to, there's no difference growing up in DC during this war on drugs than the child soldier in Rwanda, in those tribal areas, where these kids are militarized and become soldiers, and become inert and insensitive to death and pain, and that they're inflicted upon them, but also inflicting death and pain on other people. And you don't have a realistic sense of seeing the age of 18. You don't have a value for your life, so you don't value other people's lives. So that type of mentality led to behaviors that would correspond to how I was shooting people and got shot, and just, living fast and die young, not thinking about consequences. And ultimately, in March of 1996, I was involved in a conspiracy and murder, where a 14-year-old was shot and killed. And myself and another youth offender was arrested for that. And subsequently, at the age of 18, 3 months after my 18th birthday, I was charged for that murder. And in 1996, that was the last time I seen the streets. 1998, I was found guilty, sentenced to life without parole. And yes, that was my journey in the carceral system.
So a couple follow-up questions on that. What about the education system at that time? Did you stay in school?
Yeah,
Was it a
that's like,
non-factor because of all these other factors?
see what my situation, like I say, I always was been like an anomaly. Like my father, he worked for the Navy Department as HVAC technician. My mother, she was a teacher's aide. So like I always did well in school. But you know, once you leave the house, you have another set of teachers called your peers. And even though like my parents try to provide for me a middle class upbringing, I'm going to school with my peers who are in abject poverty. That all they know is hot drugs and things of that nature. So, like my school says, like growing up in the '80s, like the teaching style is like our teachers was more like our parents. I grew up under that corporal punishment era where the teachers used to spank you
Ah,
and all those other things. However, like outside the classroom, outside of home, I was schooled in the ways of the street with my peers and my environment.
okay, I see. And when you were arrested, and you had legal representation, I assume at your trial, what
Yeah,
was that like? Did you feel that was adequate?
not at all. Um, you got to realize, I mean, what I learned later on, like that, you know, our so quote unquote justice system, criminal justice system, is only a byproduct of the economic system that we call slavery. You know that, and how when you go through that whole process of processing people, of not saying that they are now wards of the states, or basically a property of the states, or submit to the attorney general. you know that's how they treat you, and so there's always this a bias through these court appointed lawyers, saying they already assume that you're uneducated, that you don't have the ability to voice for yourself. But due to like one lawyer, he may have like 20 people in his caseload. So you don't have the type the bandwidth to litigate all these cases. So the first thing they tell you, man, look, go ahead and take a cop. You young, you 18, you take a 10-year cop, you be 28, you still young. Then, when it comes to Black lives, like when they talk about years and times, they don't really view that as this is a life, and when you're young, you don't really concept that the concept of time. Like what are you investing in? Those years that you lose, you can never get back. So yeah, it's definitely like it's like a dog and pony show when you stand in front of the judge. It's not about laws. It's all about how do we fuel this economic system that we call the BOP.
Yeah.
So
I'm
did
so
you plead guilty or did you go to trial?
No, I went to trial.
You went to trial, okay.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
going to ask about the economic piece, because I think that plays a critical role in terms of accessing quality legal representation. So, and I know you said you grew up in the middle class, but think about those who you hung around with. I'm using your term, abject poverty. They don't have the means, the financial means to hire someone,
Right.
a personal attorney. So they have to, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. You have to subject yourself to the attorneys that they appoint you to out of no decision of your own, because you
Right.
don't, because of the economic the limitations that you have to bring in your own legal counsel. So for you, if you had the means, well, the question would be, did you have the means to hire your own attorney, or did you have to just subject yourself to whatever the court appointed attorney? Do you think that would have made a difference if you was able to get your own legal representation?
Definitely. Because what you said, the key thing, everything is about economics. Because the whole reason why these youth are in the court system in the first place is the economic because of poverty. You know what I'm saying? We live. America's the richest country in the world. There's no reason that there is a poverty line in America. One man could single-handedly eradicate poverty. However, poverty creates job opportunities for a certain class of people. So Black and brown people are using economic fodder to fuel this system, but we don't know that. So like when you stand in front of the court system, the biggest fallacy is that it's about truth or justice. No, if you have the financial means to get a lawyer, it's not about proving your innocence. It's about who's gonna tell the best story, who's gonna sway the peers, which is not your peers if you're Black. You know, who's gonna sway this panel of people to believe their side of the story, and that's going to determine whether you go home or not. So a lot of us don't have that type of means to sway to get the pendulum swinging in your favor.
Yeah. Wow. You know, I just want to circle back about you know, you mentioned your father, and you said he grew up in the South, and how fatherlessness impacts, you know, two-parent household tends to provide, you know, the balance between the nurturing and the discipline. As a dad, I see that with my kids. My wife nurture, I provide the discipline, the structure. We both do it, but they look for me for that part. Absent of that, particularly as a young man, you know, the father really helps shape identity. And so not having your dad in your life, you know, well, having him in your life, but you said he was abusive. How did that kind of shape your sense of identity?
I mean, like, to your point, it's imperative that, you know, like you say, the mother and the father, they are co-contributors of the household, but it's imperative, especially when you have a male child, you know what I'm saying, to have a father in their life. You know, through history, like if you look like how the founding fathers of this country, when a man had a child, if he was a farmer, his son was reared to be a farmer. He's a fisherman, he's bred to be a fisherman. Policeman, you know, it's a generational career path for, you know, this is how you attenuate your legacy. You know, with that tradition has been eradicated from the Black household. And like with my circumstances, I didn't have a frame of reference on what manhood was. You know, like when you think about dad, your dad, the first thing is your dad supposed to be your protector, you know, the source of strength. Yeah, my father was very strict, but you know, my dad was a tormentor. You know, he instilled a sense of inadequacy in me, and hatred and rage. And, you know, anytime somebody beats you and you just feeling helpless, you know, you just feel like you got this indescribable hate and rage that you just want to destroy everything, you know. And so, like I say, I hated my father. Like, literally, I tried to kill my father. I was going, man, that was like, I'm gonna kill this dude because my father, oh nigga, I'm gonna kill you and you this and that. Like, he berated me. Like why this dude hate me? However, and through the mitigating process, and this further along, like with the Second Look Act, you know, you have this a process called the mitigation phase where they got assess your stress assessment to see how you safe, what is safe to let you go back in society. And but they do a background on yourself, on your family. So when I discovered my father's background, that really gave me the impetus to forgive him, you know, because my father didn't do anything to me that wasn't done to him. It's just the fact that when I was a kid, I didn't know my father. My father never talked to me. I didn't know my mother. My parents, they were excellent providers, but they didn't know how to be quote unquote good parents, you know, like nurturing. Like, so when I learned about who my father was back then, the things that happened to him, you know, it don't justify the things that he did to me, but I understand why he did it.
Sure. Wow. Well, thank you so much for, you know, for sharing that, you know, being transparent and vulnerable and answering that question, because I know fathers are very important in a young child's life, particularly young men. Winnette, can you tell us a little bit about your film, District of Second Chances? What inspired you to make it? I know you are also you know, involved in some other projects, the Prison Wives and the Families Against Mandatory Sentencing. What challenges you faced, and what are some of the key messages that you would like to promote through your filmmaking, more specifically this one here, District of Second Chances?
Oh, District of Second Chances came about because I work for FAMM, or Families Against Mandatory Minimums, and FAMM supports second chances all around the country. Second chances mean that people get another look at their sentence. You know, it seems like a simple concept. We actually all believe that people do get that, but they don't. The parole system doesn't really work. So it's just a way of saying parole, really, have people changed? So we decided to take a look at how Second Chances was unfolding in our backyard, because we're based in DC. DC has some of the most progressive second chance laws. And it actually happened, COVID came and we're in the middle of COVID, and traveling was difficult. So that was another reason to just stick around and see what was going on. And you know, these are actually brand new laws, and people had to work hard to get them passed and then see what was wrong with them, how to improve them. And then meanwhile, inside, people were hearing about this and feeling like, at last, a ray of hope. Because most people inside, you know, they wake up and they try to get out, and there's no way. They are so stuck. It's so difficult to get out. But people try, and this gave a real chance to people for the first time. There was never any guarantee. Not everyone gets a second chance. So people actually have to spend at least a year preparing their cases. And when you're in prison, again, you don't have a lot of money. So this is all being done by pro bono lawyers. So really, the story behind the law was of the classic tale of men trying to get home after being away for decades. If you can imagine, you know, just not being able to go home, stuck. And in DC, people go all over the country. So most times family can't afford to go see you. So it's a complete journey, like an odyssey, you know, trying this, trying that, navigating different challenges, trying to stay alive. And so for each of these men, they had a somewhat different path, but it all involved a lot of stories, you know, a lot of challenges. And we got to pick up the stories that they had at different stages of being about to get out. And so obviously this all has to do with, you know, extreme sentences, life sentences. Why do we give those? We do it without a thought. In this country, there are so many people with life sentences. That's just what we do. But actually, life sentences don't make us any safer. Most people who have studied criminal justice at all know that life sentences don't add to public safety. It's just what politicians say, you know, and it is amazing how fast they say it. DC has had a rise in crime since the pandemic, and people are saying it again, and they're trying to actually undo these laws. So even knowing that extreme sentences do not make us safer, people don't want to dig into the root of what causes crime, because that is both simple and hard. You know, invest in schools, invest in jobs, right? This is the most fundamental criminal justice reform that you can do. But that's hard. It's a lot easier to say, lock them up, be tough on crime. You know, they used to say 3 strikes and you're out. There was nothing built in there about the ability to change, about the reality that it is young people who commit crimes and that people grow out of crime. You know, none of that is factored into the blanket system of giving people decades or life sentences. And so we try to touch on all that in a way that you can hopefully understand and care about, because if you meet the people, you will probably care about them and think about them in a different way than you ever have. And it's only because we don't know what's going on that we can say, oh, well, it must be okay. If you do the crime, you do the time. It doesn't take into account the idea that the time is not right. It's not like someone's worked out the perfect equation. In fact, they've worked out an equation that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. And the family dynamics too. I mean, Colie just shared a little bit about the family dynamics that kind of perpetuate some of the behavior stuff. So from a rehabilitative standpoint, the criminal justice system really falls short on that, not, you know, providing the necessary rehabilitative services for inmates who may have a background of growing up fatherless or, you know, poor or, you know, socioeconomically deprived. And those things, it sounds like to me, it makes that a prime candidate for a life sentence. Like they don't have, so there's no they're on a low totem pole of the human capital system in our society. So let's just pretty much do away with them and not recognize that these are human beings that have been impacted by some type of situation. Like he said, he researched and learned about his dad. And I was going to ask about the displaced anger, because I know most men that grow up in the deep South and have roots attached, aligned to slavery, they're angry and bitter individuals.
Mm.
And that can be displaced sometimes.
Yeah, so years ago, I saw a documentary, and I think it's called the 13th Amendment.
Yeah.
13.
Yeah, and it really draws a close parallel between slavery and, passing draconian laws, putting black people, men primarily, away, get rid of them, they're gone. That's the solution, as you alluded to, was a political thing at the time. But was your sentence a mandatory sentence, so that there was no opportunity for parole down the road, and how does the second chance law in the District of Columbia impact mandatory sentences? And then I want to get to your experience, Colie, in prison. But could you speak to that?
Well, my sentence, like for first degree murder in DC, the sentence mandatory is life and eligibility of parole after 30 years. But we also
30
have,
years.
yeah, but we also have indeterminate sentences where people that are convicted of those type of offenses, they can get sentenced to like 15 to life for like second degree murder, or manslaughter, but it's always indeterminate. So you might get 30 to 20 to life, 30 to life, 45 to life, 60 to life, but you always have a life sentence on the back end. You have two
I
sentences.
see.
My case was because I wouldn't cooperate with the government. The government filed enhancement papers, and which is under the DC code, under that provision, they can't do that for if they can prove any aggregating factors to substantiate which will warrant them filing superseding, not for enhancement of sentence for life without parole. So yes. So once the government did that and the court found there was probable cause to that, whatever, they granted it. And so when I was convicted, yes, they sent the judge sentenced me to life without prison, life without the possibility of
So
parole.
there was no minimum.
No minimum. It was
I see.
basically
So
death
okay.
sentence. Like
I
I
see.
was
So
dying in prison.
all right. So you were facing your entire life in prison,
Yes.
and so the second chance law sort of um, mitigates against that.
Yes. The second chance
And
law is basically it's an extension of the original law that the DC Council passed, which is called the IRA law, the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act. This law was passed by DC Council based on the Supreme Court case Miller versus Alabama, where it found that the brain of a child does not fully develop to the age of 24. So Dita had this diminished capacity, where they don't really the impulsiveness, the rash decision making, the inability to like cognitively understand the consequences of your action that you're making. All these factors need to take place where the judge, they're not allowed to take place when these juveniles are charged as adults. So once they're charged as adults, their sentence to these harsh adults is made for adults, and these sentences are given with mind that there's no that these people cannot be redeemed. They're like the irreparable. It's some they're incorrigible, whatever. So when that law was passed, the DC Council they wrote the legislation due to Crystal Carpenter, who she's in the actual documentary, that because her brother was a youth offender at 16, sentences were like an astronomical number. So she kind of rallied the crowd and got like signatures and legislators to listen to, hey man, these kids, man, this law says exactly what I've been arguing for years. So long story short, in 2016 or 17, they passed the IRA law and that law was for 17 on down. My case was I was 18. 18 as an adult. However, the law says the brain doesn't fully develop till you're 24. So after a couple of years of guys coming home with the IRA look, and these guys are doing well. They're flourishing in the community. They're getting practicing civic engagement. They're violence interrupters, credible messengers. They're out there in these at-risk environments. The environments that they're trying to escape from, they willingly go back in and try to save these young people that were making the same mistake that they made one time. So the city council took notice of that, and at the spearhead, Councilman Charles Allen, he was he was chairing the Justice Committee, I think, and they helped put together this Second Look Act where it extended the age from 17 to 18 to 24, and that's a lot of guys, myself.
I bet you every listener, no matter what their age, if they're older than that, can remember back several instances when they did stupid things. Right. It might not be to the level that you or have the environment that you are in, but I can tick off a number of my own experience. So I get that. So tell us.
John, can I just ask one quick question? And I think this is important about access, right? Because access. You grew up in the 80s. I grew up in the 80s. In the crack epidemic, I grew up in Queens, and it was big up in Queens, New York. And you think about access between drugs and guns, because without the access of those two elements, I don't think the risk factors are minimized, if not even prevalent in communities. So I just want to access to, at 16, 17, and I didn't learn how to apply for a firearm legally until I was an adult. And think about access. How did that impact you? The fact that you were able to have access to some of these items to, how did that influence your actions? Because I think that's important.
Honestly, and that's a great point that you raised, that during that law, there's been a study, right, that shows that based on the risk behavior, the behavior with adolescent boys, no matter if you're white, black, Latino, it don't matter what race you are, when you get to from that age of like 11, earliest 11, like from 12 to 16, it's been studied that all these youths make the same show the same level of behavior pattern, right? So they want to test it where they're in the area where they want to discover who they want to test boundaries, test limits, that's that type of trait, excludes race, anything. That's just in us. However, the problem that separates non-black youth from non-white youth is that what you just said. We all got these traits to test the boundaries, to discover who we are, or to break the law, right? But for us, like you say, we are we come up in underserved communities, but we got high access to elements of criminal elements, drugs and guns and things of that nature. So when you're, like you say, proximity to this, it increased the criminality exponentially, because when you got the drugs right there, the guns, you can get guns and drugs quicker than you get a library card. And then when your parents are not in a position to provide for you, then it's just like a recipe for destruction right there. When you got guns, and we're not the manufacturer of the guns, we're not the distributor of the guns, but these guns magically find themselves in our community.
That's the point I want. Okay, yeah.
So, tell us about your experience in prison, and what you've observed about the injustices within the prison system itself for those who are incarcerated, and then a bit about what you alluded to earlier, sort of the process that you had to go through to qualify for the second chance. And
Well,
and when that add to it too, you're a student of this now too, having done a film.
and first of all, like I said, I give a lot of times, myself and like my other colleagues who are like the subjects of the documentary, we don't get Winnette her due praise. I mean, for like how she captured our stories and make it a cohesive story with like full of emotion and to show our level of humanity from who we were to who we are now. And because I understand there's a lot of implicit bias to a lot of people that we show the documentary at first, because automatically when you hear this person's was arrested for murder, they feel like they got what they deserve, you know. But I've seen a lot of people that not necessarily express that verbally, but I can see that they kind of like under that mindset. But I can see a shift in their spirit, you know, after watching that documentary. And so that's a testament of Winnette's creative genius and how she put everything together. So I just want to say
Yeah.
that. To your question, like, and I mentioned this in the documentary, like I seen when I was in solitary, like I said, I was in solitary for almost 3 years, from 2003 to 2005. And in that spot, I was in my lowest spot. I was in my low point, and I seen another incarcerated fellow lose their mind. And when I seen this guy lose his mind like that, that was one of the few times I really felt afraid in prison, because I really felt that could be me. You know, I'm gonna die in prison. I got life without parole. And when I seen how the level of apathy, the level of inhumanity from both the correctional staff and the incarceration staff, like when I was going to rec, because they escort you out the cell, and two white officers. I was in Terre Haute, Indiana, and they're escorting me to my rec cage, and I could see the individual that was screaming all night. This guy was screaming, blood curdling sound, screaming. He had feces all on his face and his beard, shirt dirty, walking, banging his head on the glass. And the officer was like, this nigga lost his mind, laughing. And I'm a black man. I'm like, and you can hear the other incarcerated people kicking on the door, like, kill yourself, shut the fuck up. Oh, like, you know, there's so much hurt and agony, you know. I hated prison, man. When I went back to my cell, I actually cried. I hated jail. I hated that I was in that space like that, you know. That's why I don't believe in rehabilitation. Prison does not rehabilitate you. And I didn't want to be rehabilitate means to restore to your former state. And a lot of us, ironically, you know, sadly, we're prisoners before we actually went inside prison due to our condition, our environment. You know, we had an inmate mentality before we even entered the institution. So I turned prison to a place of a sanctuary for healing, and I used that spot. I used education as my platform for transformation. You know, the two books that I read, I mean, I'm Muslim, so like I had the Quran to help give me a spiritual basis on where my connection with my creator. Academically, for our substance of character, uh two books changed my man. Really was the impetus for my paradigm shift. Dr. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. You know, but it was really Frederick. When I read Frederick Douglass, The Narrative of American Slave, and I really, when you understand Frederick Douglass' quest to get educated, when it's the same, if you want to hide something from a nigga, put in a book, you know, but when it was a story that really changed my viewpoint, like why I wanted to pursue education, because when Frederick Douglass came to the South, he went to Baltimore, and his slave master's wife used to like him. So she used to read to him, teach him how to read. So one day the husbands came in, and he caught his wife teaching Frederick Douglass read, and he admonished her severely. He said, if you teach a slave how to read, if you educate a slave, he will no longer be fit to be a slave. You know, and when and being an inmate was being a slave in another name, that really propelled me that, you know what, now I'm gonna use education, you know, as my catalyst, you know, for transformation. Because Dr. Viktor Frankl, he said, you know, he was key to my thinking when he said, you know, every fundamental right can be taken away from you except for your freedom to choose how you're gonna respond to the circumstance. you know. So understanding that being in prison was outside my circle of control, being a prisoner was optional. So that's why I wrote my first book when I was incarcerated, with my screenplay. I first matriculated into the college while I was incarcerated. I was actually living my best life while I was incarcerated. That to the point I created a program that I implemented in two institutions called Turning a Life Sentence to a Life of Substance. And there's a program for other guys with life without parole sentence. It was like a support group. Challenge them to be their best self. I champion. I had a mantra that I wanted to be the best of bringing out the best in others. And when I embodied that ideology, I always felt like I had a sense of liberation that could never be taken away from me.
It's interesting you mentioned Viktor Frankl's book. One of the things he was telling the Holocaust, the camp prisoners, is not to say that you're sick. Like the two lines. Remember in the book he talks about the two lines. One is if you're ill and you're sick, go to the left.
Right.
If you're healthy, go to the right. And
right.
So he told the guy, don't tell him you're sick, because if you go to the left, that's you're gonna see the smoke.
Yeah.
So for you, what did you have to preserve and not, because from what I understand, prison is a very violent place. And they say you got to man up when you go in there. How are you able to just sustain yourself and keep yourself out of harm's way for all of that time? What did you have to not show in order to show that I'm not the person to kind of like mess with, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like prison can be a violent place. A lot of places are violent because violence is just like an offshoot of another problem. Prison is a place of hurt, pain, and misery. Hurt people the most, So I had to unlearn this hurt. I had to start like invest. A lot of people don't love themselves, so they can't love others. They feel like they're not worthy of love. That's why they feel like they don't have no value. That's why they're always putting themselves in compromising situations where they can lose their life, or they have no qualms about taking somebody else's life. So I had to learn how to love myself, remind myself that I'm worthy of love. So with that comes with working out. If I love something, that means I'm going to protect it. You know what I'm saying? So if I feel like you're going to do something to it, you're going to have problems. And dudes going to understand that. Like, this is a dash that, I mean, like saying violence can be used as a currency, but it's unfortunate that like when a man understands the threat of violence, sometimes if a person feel like oh he weak or something, like you just a lamb, they kind of prey on you. But when a man sense that this guy gonna fight for this, or I'm gonna leave him alone, I ain't gonna mess with this one or something. So unfortunately, sometimes prison is a place where you might have to demonstrate your level of love for myself. Like, I ain't gonna let you, I'm gonna do something to you before I think you're gonna do something to me. You know what I'm saying? And once people get the miss, And then, but most part, people recognize, like, they see that if you're on a good path, because a lot of times, if you're on some knucklehead stuff, you're gonna get the knucklehead BS. But a lot of times, if you on like the right path, like this dude, he ain't on drugs, he ain't on the gang stuff. He work out, he go to school, he go to church. A lot of times, dudes is not gonna really get in your way. They're gonna respect your movement, because a lot of times, even though people be on negative, they be respecting people that's doing positive. So you just gotta live your truth. Now, if you trying to have feet both sides of the fence, people gonna test you. Or they gonna when they see inconsistency in your character, yeah, that open up the floodgate for people to try to test you in all type of ways. But if they see you walking on your truth, ain't too many people will get in your way.
So when that two questions for you. What was the hardest part of producing this film? And what did you learn? I don't mean now learn about you're in a creative, you're creating something, but I assume you're learning as you go along. But what did you take away from this film? So what was the biggest issue that you had to deal with in making on the creative side? But then what did you learn personally from this experience?
Yes, thank you. Well, filmmaking is so wonderful because you learn so much. It's like having a passport to go into people's lives and talk to them in a way that you would never get to ordinarily. Um, so it's one of the amazing things about filmmaking. And I do want to say that, many thanks to Colie for um, recognizing that the film was an act of love, really. For something to be good, you just have to pour yourself into it. And I did that with my filmmaking partner, Travis Edwards, who did the shooting and the editing. And the two of us worked so closely together, so many conversations, so day after day, trying to capture something good. Um, and so probably the greatest creative challenge was simply trying to gather the pieces and make it into a coherent story. Because as we made it, we didn't know what was going to happen with two of the men, Gene Downing and Colie himself. They were inside. Access to people in prison is so restricted. They can't come to the camera and do an interview, unless you get special permission, which we were not able to get. So we were limited to Zoom and occasional phone call, and then their families had to step up and tell some of the story. So already as characters, their distance, you have a hard time really getting to know what is their story about. And then on top of that, the Second Chance Amendment Act or the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act, you just say those names and it sounds like, I don't know why they named bills like that. But they were so important. So I was really trying to breathe some life into the bills and show what these, very stiff sounding laws mean in people's lives. And even tell the story a bit of how the laws were passed, hoping that other people in other cities and other states will say, oh, we see how that fits into our system. Because, there's 15 states that have second chance laws, and people are trying to get them passed in other states, and they try and they fail, just like here. And so hopefully there's something about the success of DC that will translate to other states. And then I learned so much. I in turn have to say hats off to Colie and Pete and Gene for opening their lives up, to this Chinese woman and a white guy. They come out, everyone's masked. They haven't been out in decades, and here's a camera that comes poking in their faces, and we tried not to interfere with them too much. Tried not to ask them too much. Hey, can you do that again? But the reality is sometimes you have to do that, and you are trying to shape in your mind both visually and story wise. Okay, how are we going to tell this? How do we make people interested? How do we get them to see how important this is? But the three men were really wonderful in sharing their hearts, so you really felt a lot of what they were going through, I think. So the film is, truly collaborative in every way. And then what I learned was really the resilience of the human heart. I mean, it seems irrepressible, right? That people can face such obstacles and so little hope. They had no hope. They were stuck, but they kept going. They kept trying to improve themselves. They kept trying this, trying that. Wow. That's it's really quite amazing.
You're having your second chance. What's your second chance like? How's it been being out and adjusting to getting out? And what are you doing? What's your vision for your life now?
I mean, for so long, you live your life vicariously through books that you read, shows you see on TV, or conversations other people they have on the phone, right? But as I know when that can attest to, a lot of times, like my greatest thing is that like I really wanted to come home and hug my grandmother, kiss my grandmother, and watch the sunrise. 26 years, I never could see the sun rising. I'm always in a false cut glass, or by the time you are allowed to go outside, the sun is already up. you know. So, I'm just living like currently I work for Georgetown University. I'm a program associate for the Prison and Justice Initiative there. I'm also a student at Georgetown. I'm working on getting my undergrad. I'm a former of FAMM, Family Gets Mandatory Minimum. I'm a justice fellow. I had the honor of working with them, going to Capitol Hill, doing some lobbying to try to get some laws passed, particularly like the federal oversight bill. Um, um, I'm a board member of Negotiation Works. Is a nonprofit that we teach people negotiation skills in the workplace, people formerly incarcerated people, and help them navigate the paths in the workforce development. So, but honestly, like I'm my how I'm paying it forward now. Like I'm also I work for inner city. I'm an inner city ambassador, safe passage ambassador, where I work with the youth inside the schools, making sure they get to school, from school into school safely. And also I'm an ambassador for Second Chance by just when people see me, know my story, see the success story, that they say they figure that I'm a success. And I'm like, hey, I'm not no exception to the rule. I'm actually very ordinary. There's like over 1,000 people that's still inside, just like me, excuse me, Gene and Anthony Petty, that's deserving of a second chance at life. I mean, they're putting the work. They put the work in to heal themselves. To atone for the things that they did, and they want to come back into the communities, not just consume the culture, but contribute to the community. And so, just knowing that my story can shed amplify the stories that you don't know yet that's still inside, then I think I'm doing my purpose. Because right now, like I say, even though I'm physically free, I'm not free until the guys that I did over 26 years are free with me. So that's my main thing too, just being an ambassador for them, being a voice for the ones that's silent. If I can be in a position to help change a viewpoint, a point of view, or a worldview about inmates or incarcerated people, formerly incarcerated people. Because the whole thing is, we remove the title. He's a person. Like you said, he a person that made a mistake. But like Brian Stevens said, those stakes are not the total sum of that person's existence, especially when they're showing you that they are contrite, they're remorse, they want to give back. They are on a quest of redemption. So that's my path out here. That's the journey I'm out here living.
Earlier, one of the two of you said something about people's attitudes that, oh, he got what he deserved. So that I've been thinking about ever since you said that. So who defines what someone deserves? You're talking about a human life that was involved in taking another human life, but you're still a human. But you talked about prison guards and so forth that didn't view you that way.
No.
So I'm just riffing a little bit here, but to a point that a lot of people listening would wonder about the victim. Did you approach any of the victims? Was there any dialogue with the victims in the film? And how do you deal with when you're in prison or you're going through this program with the fact that there was somebody that was a victim and this whole concept of restorative justice? I'm riffing big time here. I would be interested in hearing both of you talk about those things before we're getting a little short on time.
I'll let Lynette start off.
Well, it's true that people all often bring up the victim, and the victims are always, I can't speak for them because I think if you lose someone, you have to travel your own journey on that. It's obviously immensely painful. But do we give people a chance after that? That's the whole question. Is life over at that point? The law now supports the idea that if people, especially if people were young, but also if I think at any age, if they show genuine change, that they deserve another chance, a second chance, and that is actually better for our society. The victim's family may never agree, and they have the right to feel how they feel, but we as a society need to assess what we're doing. And incarcerating someone is a tremendous cost, not only economically, but also to the family of the incarcerated one, who all serve the sentence with the person inside. And the relationships that get shattered, never to be healed until the person can come out. It's just, it's like for every person, multiply times 30 or 50, the damage that their absence is doing. So in the film, we considered victims from the point of view of Eric Weaver, a man who had both taken a life and then suffered the grievous loss of his son. And of course, unfortunately, most violence in DC is Black on Black. So he is very typical. The perpetrators and the victims are Black, which I think goes against somewhat the public perception, that unfortunately Black people are making white people victims. It's not usually like that. So that's how we try to look at the very delicate subject of victims and second chances.
Yeah, and to Manette's point, in my case particular, the victim, I knew him. He was a childhood friend of his mother. Um, uh, Later on, further in in my journey of being incarcerated, I wrote letters to her. They never respond. Even at my hearing, the prosecutor reached out to the victim's mother, and she elected not to, because they have an option to like voice their opinion to the person. Do they feel like he should come home, or how do they feel? Should he stay in prison? They elected not to give any comment. They just wanted the situation to be over. They didn't want to unhash, the memories. They just wanted to let whatever happened happen. They just wanted no further apart with it. And I understand that, so yeah, and to your point, like our current mode of justice, like the prison system, is not built, it never was designed for any accountability. You're just housing, you're just warehousing people. Like when you provide a person with all their basic necessities, and a lot of guys, they do their time. They get 3 hots in the cots, early food, clothes, rec yard, and stuff, and they never really ponder about the crime they committed, things in that. I am an advocate and a component for restorative justice. I'm also taking a 1-year course to get my certification in restorative justice, because there needs to be accountability. Like I took an accountability of my actions. And honestly, I know, but I think this point should not be lost on people, because, like I say, when you're socialized to be that way, a lot of us growing up in the streets, I didn't see Ronald Williamson as a victim, and like when you're living in those type of adversarial environment, combative type terrains in the street, these concrete jungles, it be killed to be killed, So if I ain't killed this dude, he would have killed me. So I'm like, fuck him, you know what I'm saying? And that's a reality of it. But you don't realize that, yes, he is the victim, just like you were a victim of a mindset. Like, it's just like, because you think you're a victor, but this person lost his life and you lost your life. But guess what? 2 families are broken, and you don't really have that mind, the bandwidth to really think that deep. So when I really realized that, like, I used to always like get bitter that, my mother, I never really had visits, right? Because I've been so far away. And people be so self-centered, oh, you locked up, don't get no visit. But you never think the person you did to, they can't visit their son never again. You know what I'm saying? And you started to learn to empathize, like, damn, and you started to feel regret. Just like only way I had to know my father's circumstance so I could start empathizing with him and start realizing how it was bigger than him. My father was a product of intergenerational violence. Intergenerational. His father was falsely accused of raping a white woman, and the only reason why he didn't get lynched because the sheriff locked him up because he liked him, just to make sure he wouldn't get lynched. But he did 10 years, 15 years on the chain gang. You know what I'm saying? So what did my father, the things that my father seen, and the things that my peers seen, and the things that Ronald Williams from the Victim I Case saw, like we were all victims in that. So man, yeah, and I think with me personally, and a lot of guys that feel the way, we just feel ashamed that we were contributors of that destruction. So now we want an opportunity to be agents for change. So we kind of reverse that wheel that we kind of perpetuated.
Good.
I'm just sitting here listening to you talk, Colie, and it goes back to what I was saying about when you said your father was from the Deep South, and you alluded to exactly what I was saying, the generational, like slavery ended, but it really didn't end. And so
Convict leasing.
you have convict leasing, you have all of these vagrant laws and stuff to keep so that the workforce for the plantation owners were removed when slavery was abolished. So they had to find a way to kind of keep those plantations operational. So all of these things started to come into place. And I think the Ava DuVernay does a great job in 13 kind of exposing some of that stuff. But I'm talking about the mental, what you just talking about here is the mind of being a slave of your own thinking as a result of the environmental factors that a person has encountered in life. And it's just, I think those are the intangible things or the subtle things that we tend to not look at as a society in terms of the causality of some of the criminality of some of the young men that are involved in. I call it this 20-mile radius syndrome. Like most of the men, I worked in Baltimore, and a lot of kids from Baltimore City, they never even ventured to the east side of the city. Their worldview is really just confined to this 20-mile radius. And if that 20-mile radius, and I'm using your terminology, is concrete jungle, then they're gonna act like quote unquote animals if it's set up to be concrete jungle. And so I think we have to put all that into context when we look at situations like this about the victim. Like you said, there's two victims here. Victim of circumstance and victim of a crime. And so I wanted to ask Lynette, in terms of recidivism rates. So are you capturing, or is there data that's being captured for those who successfully receive a second chance in terms of reoffending? Is that highlighted into your film documentary? And what does the data say about the success rate and recidivism?
Yes, well, fortunately, the recidivism rates really back up second chances. In the case of DC, I think only 1.2% recidivate with, a violent action. There have been, various other violations like parole and various things like that. But that the rate is that low for anything even resembling, a return to violence. And that 1% rate is well below the national recidivism rate, which is somewhere around, I think, 37%.
Yeah, it's very high.
That's for many tragic reasons that are part of another show, which is that, people come out and they're really limited by the parole requirements, by the inability to get work because they're judged for their record. A number of things, including sometimes people go right back to the environment they came from, and they have the same choices as before. But Second Chances really distinguishes itself for featuring men and women who have matured. And maturity, as for all of us, really does help. You get older and you get wiser, and you just make better decisions, and that's the whole principle behind Second Chances. People change for the better.
And you become an incredible advocate, Colie. And the film is an incredible piece of advocacy as well. So is the film released, or what's the plan for release? Will people be able to see this other than at film festivals?
Yes, well, we're doing the film festival circuit now. at the same time at possibilities to stream it, to get it on broadcast. I'm optimistic that we're going to end up in some nice places. There's a lot of options these days.
Yeah, good.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, I will. We will. Yeah.
So this is my last question. Because Colie, you have ran down an abundance of positive contributions and things that you're involved in, and I just want to honor you and say, your level of resilience and bounce back power is in going through what you went through, and then to be able to say, run down a resume of the things that you're doing now as a result of the second chance is just awesome. And so, is there a distinction between second chance and exoneration, like from a legal standpoint? I'm just trying to understand that, because I know exoneration, you're not a felon, and so you can get housing, you can apply for federal. So tell me, so what benefits are, if any, that comes with second chance release?
Right. I'll real briefly because I gotta go. But exoneration, like to your point, you've been proven that you have not committed that crime, so you get the restoration of your full rights as a citizen. When you get a second chance, you're a second-class citizen. However, a lot of people, you're just you're in love with the fact that you're outside the carceral space. DC is unique. We got a lot of our rights back. We still practice civic engagement. We can vote. We can vote in DC. We still we have rights for we don't have the right to bear arms and things like that. But as far as DC, huh?
Get your driver's license.
Yeah.
Okay.
You driver's license.
Ban the box. Right. So when
ban the box,
it's so important.
That works so much because they don't have the right to ask you, have you been incarcerated or not. However, they still have the right to do a background check. So I think that's even work because you can start working for 3 or 4 months, get in the groove, or thinking you have this earnable income, you're lethally gained, and 4 months later you get fired because the background check came through. So it's kind of sucks, but. You know what I'm saying? We make it do. We have on the local level, there's a lot of felon-friendly employment opportunities, like with the DC government. Not too strong with the private sector, but we're trying to get some push where we can get the federal government to open up the restrictions, man, for the allow returning citizens back into the workforce. So,
yeah, awesome. Thank you all. Thank you so much to our guests, Wynette and Colie, for joining us. Thank you so much for your transparency, your vulnerability. Colie, really appreciate you sharing your experience and your second chance. And it seems like you're embracing that and you're doing great things in your community. So thank you all out there for listening to another Race to Social Justice podcast. Please join us again for another courageous conversation. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to our channel as we continue to run this race towards a just society. Thank you all for being here.
Can I insert one thing?
Sure.
If you're interested by the issues raised in this podcast, would love it if you go check out the FAMM website, which is FAMM.org. And the film also has a website, districtofsecondchances.com, and we appreciate any support.
The Race to Social Justice podcast is produced, edited, and mixed at The Dream in Austin, Texas. Visit thedreamrecordingstudio.com for more info.